Welcome guys, I have a completely different video for you today. You and me are going to watch an interview. Owen Wilson, the historian, columnist, YouTuber, interviews British-Israeli Jewish historian Professor Avi Shlaim. Avi is a history professor at Oxford University. He has written many books, almost all of them relating to Arab-Israeli relations. You can find a link to the full interview on Owen Jones' channel in the description below, together with all the sources I'm going to be referring to during the course of this video. I'm making this video because I feel as though there's a lot of confusion around what's really happening in Palestine right now. A lot of people don't really know the history of the Israel Palestine conflict, including myself. And that's okay, because no one can be expected to be an expert on every single subject, every single conflict. That's just not realistic. We all have stuff to do. But I noticed that there's a lot of people that do want to understand what's really going on in Gaza right now. And what I usually do when I want to know more about a subject and I don't have a lot of time to familiarize myself with all the different details of that particularly complex subject, I just listen to what the experts have to say. And when it comes to Palestinian-Israeli relations, Avi Shlaim is one of the leading historians, experts on this subject. Again, he's a professor at Oxford University. He's dedicated his whole life to this subject. I'll be interrupting the interview multiple times to give you some context on certain specific topics, just so you're warned. So without further ado, let's start the video.
It's impossible to make any sense of what is happening today without understanding the historical context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October was utterly horrific and cannot be justified because it involved the killing of 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, and atrocities were committed. So it was a horrific event which has been denounced and must be denounced.
Yeah, so let me interrupt right here, because this is a very important topic. I noticed that a lot of people choose a side and defend their side no matter what, defend the atrocities their side commits. I think it's important to denounce both what Hamas has done in October and what Israel is doing right now. Suffering is equal no matter who is suffering. Let's go
on. But as the Secretary General of the United Nations said at the time, this attack didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in the context of 56 years of suffocating Israeli occupation. And he went on to say that the context doesn't justify the attack, but it helps to explain it. And the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Erdan, immediately launched a vicious personal attack on the Secretary General of the United Nations. He accused him falsely of anti-Semitism. He said nothing that was anti-Semitic. He called for his resignation. He appealed to members of the United Nations to stop funding the organization. And he even said that the Secretary General of the UN is a threat to world peace.
So what Avi is referring to here is the incident where the Israeli ambassador to the UN called for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' resignation, because Mr. Guterres said that what happened in October, Hamas's attack, didn't happen in a vacuum, which is true. It didn't happen in a vacuum. There's things that led up to the event. And we're going to go into some of them later.
And the brief historical context, the long historical context would take us back to the Balfour Declaration of 1917.
So the Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, that was back then was an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. On the 2nd of November 1917, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote to Lord Rothschild, who was a Jewish leader in the United Kingdom back then. And basically declared that that the United Kingdom wishes to see a Jewish state in Palestine.
But I would like to start with the Israeli occupation of Gaza in 1967, the fact that the Palestinians for 56 years have been living under occupation, the most prolonged and brutal military occupation of modern times. So this is the everyday reality for Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza, a brutal military occupation, arbitrary occupation that denies them independence, denies them human rights, denies them all of the basic rights that every people is entitled to. What Israel experienced on the 7th of October is a very, very extreme and dramatic and painful attack, but it is has to be seen against the background of long-standing Palestinian suffering. And there is one other point about the context for the Hamas attack. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's line to the Israeli public is that he is the guarantor of Israeli security, and that the Palestinians are finished. The Palestinians are defeated. Israel has a free hand to do whatever it likes on the West Bank. And as for Gaza, it's contained within the prison of Gaza. Gaza is the largest open-air prison in the world, and part of his policy was to allow Hamas to govern Gaza.
So here Avi's referring to how Netanyahu basically allowed Hamas to be in power because he needed them to divide the Palestinian state into two, the West Bank and Gaza, in order to keep them from uniting into a Palestinian state, because if they united, their case would basically become stronger. And having Hamas in Gaza, basically an extremist organization that was leading, that's a government in Gaza, basically allowed him to show to the outside world, hey, Hamas is a terrorist organization firing rockets at us. We can't have a united Palestinian state because that's just going to threaten our stability and harm us. In the meantime, Netanyahu's acting like he's doing whatever he can to keep Hamas from posing a threat. At the same time, Netanyahu allowed billions of dollars from Qatar to be transported through Israel in cash, in suitcases, to Hamas, just to keep them afloat, because that basically divided the Palestinian state. There's a lot of proof for this. You can see it in this article. Again, you'll find a link to everything I mentioned. Every article you're going to see, you'll find a link in the description down below.
But Gaza was contained. There was an Israeli blockade of Gaza, which has been in force for 16 years. And a blockade is a form of collective punishment which is prescribed by international law. After the Hamas attack on Israel, Israel extended the blockade that had inflicted so much suffering on the Palestinians in Gaza, and now they cut off water, food, medical supplies, and fuel. So they use starvation as a weapon of war. This is a new level of brutality, of cruelty, even of sadism. So that is the background to the Hamas attack, because the message that sent was, we are not defeated, we are not finished. And Hamas, it's true that the Palestinian Authority doesn't represent any resistance. Indeed, the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah has become a subcontractor for Israeli security. That's why it doesn't enjoy legitimacy. And Hamas said, we are still here. We cannot be ignored. And we continue to lead the national struggle against the occupation. And there was one other reason for the timing of the Hamas attack, and that is that America persuaded a number of Arab countries, 4 Arab countries, to sign the Abraham Accords with Israel. And America put very strong pressure on Saudi Arabia to join the circle of the Abraham Accords. And there was a deal that was on the table. It would have taken a few more weeks, and Saudi Arabia would have joined the circle of Arab states who are at peace with Israel.
So here Avi's referring to the fact that Saudi Arabia was about to join the Abraham Accords, which basically means recognizing Israel in return for certain benefits from the United States. They were about to finalize an agreement with Israel, recognizing Israel, which basically would have abandoned the Palestinians, since historically Arab states would link their recognition of Israel to the inception of a Palestinian state, basically. And now in recent years, Arab countries have been recognizing Israel without any of that. And Hamas's attack was basically a way to thwart that effort, to keep the Saudis from recognizing Israel and to put the Palestinian cause back on the table, basically.
I'm interested in how you termed Israel's onslaught against Gaza state terrorism. Terrorism has been used by Western states basically to claim their violence is legitimate and moral, and in contrast to their opponents. It's a very politicized term, terrorism. It is interesting, actually, in the context of the so-called Dahiya Doctrine developed in the 2006 Lebanon war, in which essentially Israeli strategy is to you inflict terrible damage on civilian populations with terrible civilian fatalities in order, in the context of Lebanon, to get them to put pressure on Hezbollah and in Gaza to put pressure on Hamas.
So here Owen is referring to the Dahiya Doctrine, which is named after a certain neighborhood in Beirut, Lebanon. The doctrine was invented by Gadi Eisenkot, the Israeli Chief of General Staff, former Chief of General Staff, and it basically calls for the destruction of civilian infrastructure and the use of disproportionate force to reach your goals, basically just completely destroying any neighborhood you go into just to prove your point. And this has been, you can see it in this article, link down below again. Read more about the Dahiya Doctrine and how that's been deployed in Lebanon, how it's being deployed in Gaza right now. The main PR stance from the Israeli perspective now is that civilians are not being attacked, and that they're trying to do whatever they can to avoid civilian deaths. But the Dahiya Doctrine is actually what they're doing in practice, which is basically just destroying as much as you can to prove your point. More about it down below again.
And a very brilliant Israeli and Palestinian publication called 972 magazine, plus 972 magazine, actually used they spoke to sources of military intelligence to kind of confirm this was actually happening. But I'm just interested in that, your view on state terrorism, Israel, given obviously the official claim of Israel is that this is self-defense, that they're waging self-defense to shut down terrorism. So just what's your thoughts on how terrorism is used and why we should talk about this as state terrorism?
Terrorism is the use of military force against civilians for a political purpose. And a Hamas attack on Israeli civilians is a form of terrorism. And an Israeli attack on Palestinian civilians in Gaza for political purposes is a form, in my book, is a form of state terrorism. Now, Israel claims that it has the right to self-defense, and all its Western allies, like Biden, like Rishi Sunak, like Sir Keir Starmer, repeat parrot fashion that Israel has the right to defend itself. But it doesn't under international law, because although Israel withdrew unilaterally from Gaza in 2005, it is still the occupying power because it controls access by land, sea, and air to Gaza. So Israel is the occupying power. Israel doesn't have the right to self-defense against the people that it occupies. And therefore, I call the Israeli attacks on Gaza, this is, by my count, this is the sixth Israeli military offensive in Gaza, and all of them are acts of state terrorism in as much as they are directed not against Hamas, but against the people of Gaza as a whole. And if I may, I'd like to refer to the first Israeli attack on Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, in late December 2008 and early January 2009. That was Operation Cast Lead. There is the Goldstone report about that operation, and it's a very impressive report, very detailed account of 33 Israeli episodes and many Israeli war crimes. And the conclusion is that the Israeli attack on Gaza was, in a broader sense, an attack on the people of Gaza, and its aim was to punish, humiliate, and terrorize the people of Gaza.
So here Avi refers to a United Nations fact-finding mission that was done after the first, or I think the Gaza war in 2006. That report basically concluded that the war was targeting people in Gaza as a whole, intimidating the population, was actually seen as the main aim of the war. The report also says that Israel's military assault on Gaza was designed to humiliate and terrorize the civilian population, radically diminish its local economic capacity, both to work and to provide for itself, basically completely destroying the economy so that there's nothing left and the people have nothing to do after the war, if they've survived. And basically to force upon them the feeling of like vulnerability and that there's no one that can help you. You're being humiliated, you're being terrorized, but there's no one that can... This report, the Goldstone report, I'd recommend everyone to read it. If not, just quickly go through the Wikipedia page, and that shows you what kind of tactics are being deployed, have been deployed in Gaza, and are being deployed as we speak in Gaza.
And this current offensive in Gaza is also intended to terrorize, to punish and to terrorize the people of Gaza. And the strongest argument is the one that you mentioned, the Dahiya Doctrine. This is a doctrine that was developed by the IDF during the Second War in Lebanon. And what it says is that Israel is entitled to inflict very, very severe damage and suffering on civilians for the purpose of denying the resources, denying their support to in Lebanon it was Hezbollah, in Gaza it's Hamas. So under the Dahiya Doctrine, Israel is entitled to cause massive carnage and damage to civilian infrastructure and buildings in order to turn the population against Hamas. But this war has been counterproductive and self-defeating because the Israeli atrocities and inhuman behavior towards the civilians in Gaza has turned the people of Gaza not against Hamas, but against Israel.
So here Avi refers to the rally around the flag effect, which is basically the idea that during times of crisis, during a war, people rally around their leader, no matter if the leader is good or bad. Just the idea that you have someone to look up to that can hopefully save you, to pin all your hopes on that one person. This is like a proven effect. And also a good example is, you can see it here, Bush Jr.'s popularity before 9/11, his popularity was around 50%. Right after 9/11, his popularity skyrockets to 90% because people are afraid, they're scared, they want their leader to do something about whatever's happening. And yeah, that's basically what's happening in Gaza right now. Israel's aim is to delegitimize Hamas, but what they're actually doing, they're getting people to support the only people that they think can protect them, which they can't. Hamas can't protect anyone. They can't even protect themselves. But that's what Israel's actions are causing, basically, a rally around the flag effect.
I mean, it's interesting at the moment. I've been talking a lot at the moment about South Africa's case against Israel, accusing Israel of genocide, taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. It's one of the most chilling documents I've ever read in my entire life, a very thorough, lawyerly piece. One of the things it looks at acts, conduct, and it also looks at language. And it is striking. I mean, again, I keep mentioning Segal, the Israeli-American associate professor of Holocaust and genocide studies, but he said it's very rare for genocidal intent, regardless of what people think about conduct, but genocidal intent to be so explicitly spoken on so many multiple occasions.
So here Owen refers to Segal, professor of Holocaust studies. He is associate professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Stockton University. And he said that there's never been so much proof of genocidal intent since World War II, basically. You can find an interview with Segal right here in the description down below. It's worth listening to.
And since that document came out, there have been so many other examples of genocidal incitement, which is illegal under the 1948 Genocide Convention. A state is duty-bound to prosecute those who use public platforms to incite genocide. But I'm just interested what you think about that. Is that kind of, does this just basically this is the inevitable consequence of any form of settler colonialism? You get a colonizer, it takes the land of the people who don't want their land taken off them. You get forms of violence, which then are met with terrible repression, which then feeds more violence in a very asymmetric way. And you get this cycle where eventually the occupied settler state essentially just adopts a increasingly genocidal posture. I don't know, what are your thoughts about that? Has this emerged innately from Zionism, or is this, could a different outcome have been achieved?
Settler colonialism has its own dynamic. It's not like any other form of colonialism where there is a metropole, people from that country go and occupy and live in another country, and they have a home to go back to. Settler colonialism is different, and Zionism was a settler colonial movement from the beginning. And the logic of settler colonialism, since there is another people on the land, is to eliminate that people. The rhetoric was very different. The rhetoric was developing Palestine for the benefit of both peoples, but the reality was that it was a Jewish exclusive settler colonial movement which after 1917 embarked on the systematic takeover of Palestine. So you either carry out the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and this is what Israel has been doing systematically, And in 1948, there was the first Nakba. 750,000 Palestinians became refugees. And now we are on the verge of a second Nakba. And what is utterly horrific is the genocidal rhetoric that we hear in Israel. And it's increasing all the time. And it's not one or two people, and it's not marginal people. It's from the president down. The president of Israel said there are no innocent people in Gaza. Well, Israel has just massacred over 22,000 people. 2/3 of them are women and children. And there have been so many other explicit genocidal statements. One rabbi talked about dropping an atomic bomb on Gaza as an option. And there is a majority in Israeli public opinion for an expulsion of all the people in Gaza, all 2.3 million people. And this is not just loose talk. There is a plan that was of the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence, dated 13th of October, which favors the expulsion of the population of Gaza to northern Sinai.
So here Avi refers to a leaked report about the expulsion of the residents of Gaza into Egypt, basically pushing them into the desert of Egypt and completely freeing Gaza of any Palestinian. A report that laid out step by step what to do in order to kick everyone out of Gaza, basically. It was first reported by Israeli media 6 days after Hamas's attack in October last year. You can read more about it in the link down below.
Against Egyptian opposition. Egypt is opposed to ethnic cleansing. Jordan is opposed to ethnic cleansing. But the direction of Israeli policy seems to be pointing towards ethnic cleansing, because the civilians in Gaza were pushed from the north to the south, and they are concentrated in an ever narrower area near the border with Gaza. And the Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, has said that openly that the population of Gaza should be reduced from 2.3 million to maybe 100 or 200,000.
So here Avi refers to Bezalel Smotrich, finance minister of Israel, who publicly stated that Palestinians living in Gaza should be pushed into Egypt, which is basically the definition of ethnic cleansing a certain piece of land from a certain ethnicity, in this case Arabs. Yeah, what else can I say about the man? Let's go on with the main interview.
I don't think ever in history there's been so much evidence of rhetorical support for genocide, which shows a definite intention to commit genocide. And what is very worrying in all this is the demonizing of the Palestinian people. Increasingly, and the distinction is not made between Hamas and the Palestinian people in general. More and more Israeli ministers are referring to the Palestinians as Nazis. And this is what happened in Nazi Germany. First came the demonization of the Jews, and then came the Holocaust. And I'm extremely worried that this dehumanization of the Palestinian people as a whole is paving the way to ethnic cleansing.
There's a fascinating scientific paper published in 2017 about exactly this effect, portraying the enemy as animals how politicians would portray their enemy as animals in order for the people, the masses, to morally disengage from the suffering of those same people. This basically allows people to not pay attention, even if it's clearly happening. There's clearly a genocide going on, but people are not really interested because throughout the decades they've been told that those people are not really not worthy of the kind of life that we all want. And so even though we're seeing what's happening clearly, like it's in the news every day, but it's still hard for people to really feel empathy. Like there's such a big lack of empathy, and I see it around me. Like there, a lot of people just, sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that wakes up at night, like that stays awake at night thinking about how there's other people on the other side of the planet. There's people on the other side of the planet that are being bombed in the middle of the night. That there's no way for them to escape because they're in the middle of an open air prison. And this is part of it, the propaganda that starts decades even before an actual war. Prepares everything, prepares the conditions, prepares the masses to basically not rise up when they see something like that happening, which is scary. And this specific paper goes into how people in Israel specifically and on the side of the Palestinians view the enemy as basically subhuman. Definitely worth a read. Again, in the description, you can find this paper.
Just before we go full circle, we talk about what happens next and prospects for, well, something which emerges from this horror, which can provide the only solution, which is a lasting peace, which offers security and happiness to Jews, Palestinians on the basis of a shared land. But before I just ask you, we talk about that. One of the bleakest things, when I look at the polling in Israel of the Israeli Jewish population, when most think not enough firepower has been used, a large majority support the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. One of the reasons I find that so bleak, it is very important to say millions of Jewish people don't live in Israel. I mean, if we look in the US, the Jewish population is more progressive than the average American, and a whole generation of younger Jews are actually at the forefront of the solidarity movement with Palestine at the moment. I think that's something which would worry and disturb Israel very much. Younger Jews turning away from Israel in the United States, and the US obviously is so instrumental to allowing Israel to continue to behave as it does. But the reason I just find it so bleak looking at that is the left, as we understand it, would not exist without Jewish people. And that's one of the reasons, actually, particularly in the 20th century, early 20th century, anti-Semites partly used the fact that Jews were always overrepresented in the left and in movements for emancipation, liberation, social justice.
I like what Owen says here. You know, okay, I'm a Moroccan Dutchman. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, but I have roots in Morocco. Morocco used to have a huge Jewish population. We consider the Jews as our brothers and sisters, actually. Like the movement of Jews towards Morocco is an important part of our history. When in 1492 the Jews were expelled from Spain, a lot of them moved to Morocco, and they've been welcomed. They've been living, we've been living side by side since then, basically, and even before that, a smaller population. So when they were pushed out of Europe, they came to us, to Morocco, which is like, it's a very important part of our history. We consider the Jews as part of us, and this whole thing, this whole war is like driving a wedge in between us, even though there's like we're brotherly people. It shouldn't be like this. And there's a lot of Jews that know that what's happening right now is not the right course. This shouldn't be happening. And it's like a small amount of people that make these decisions, which are backed by certain extremist people too. I mean, Israel at the end of the day is a democracy. The people in power get voted in power. So the people that the ideas in the halls of power are basically reflected in a certain group of people. But yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame that everything went the way it went. as a Dutchman too, in the Netherlands we have a sizable Jewish community. I've grown up, born and raised in Amsterdam. We have a sizable Jewish community. I've always been proud of the fact that we've lived side by side without any issues. There's always some Islamophobia, some anti-Semitism. Definitely, there's always extremists that have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. But personally, I feel as though the Jews and the Muslims, that we've cooperated, we've lived together side by side for centuries. It's such a shame that this is happening. But yeah, let's go on with the interview.
Conspiracy, the German left, obviously, again, Jews were overrepresented. And I'm just interested in terms of that form of humanism, Jewish humanism, and the left are so intertwined. And in a way, Israel's had to wage war against it, hasn't it? And one of the reasons people like yourself often get the wrath of apologists for Israel, as a Jewish person who speaks out against what Israel is doing, is you're a reminder of that tradition, which in a sense Israel has sought to marginalize. I'm just wondering what your thoughts about that are.
I'm not a practicing Jew, but as I said earlier, I'm proud of being Jewish. And as I understand it, the three principal pillars of Judaism are truth, justice, and peace. And I look at the present government in Israel, at Netanyahu himself, and he doesn't represent any of these values. He's a corrupt and mendacious politician who stands trial on serious charges of corruption.
So Avi here refers to the fact that Netanyahu has been charged with bribery, fraud, breach of trust, all kinds of accusations he's actually been charged with. The only reason he's not in prison is because he got elected his last term again, or else he would have probably been in prison by now. So that's you can read more about that again in the description down below. He doesn't have an incentive to stop the war. As long as the war goes on, he can stay in power. He's probably hoping for some miracle solution where he achieves this grand victory and his popularity skyrockets, and then he can become prime minister for life or something. I don't know. But yeah, let's go on.
And one of the reasons that he's fighting this war, and a long war, as he says, in the way that he does, is because once the fighting stops, the countdown will start for the end of his premiership, and if he's indicted, he's likely to end up in prison. So this is the kind of person who leads Israel today, and he personifies the ugliest, the most brutal, the most racist, the most xenophobic aspects of the worst kind of Zionism. But he's one person. Then his coalition partners, one coalition partner is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the Minister of Internal Security, and he is the leader of a party called Jewish Power. The name itself is a fascist, and he himself is an outright fascist.
So here, Avi refers to Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's far-right national security minister. Let's make a quick detour and look into Ben-Gvir and how much of an extremist the guy really is.
As one Israeli news website points out, in his job as a lawyer, Ben-Gvir has represented numerous Jewish Israelis accused of conducting violent attacks against Palestinians, including the convicted murderer of the Dawabshe family who were burned in their home. Over the last 30 years, Ben-Gvir himself has faced over 50 criminal charges and been convicted on 12 of them, including racist incitement and support of a terrorist organization, two charges that are rarely pursued against Jews in Israel. Ben-Gvir was so extreme that he invited reporters into his home, which is in an illegal Israeli settlement, you'll be shocked to hear, and showed them a picture of Baruch Goldstein, the man who massacred 29 Palestinians in a mosque in Hebron in 1994. He showed them a picture of him hanging on his living room wall.
Imagine if the American finance secretary had an interview in his own home and showed the guest basically a picture of a terrorist, of his Osama bin Laden on the wall, proudly displaying the picture. Like, that's the kind of people the Palestinians are dealing with right now. That's like the kind of extremist government Israel has.
Whose hero was Rabbi Kahane, whose party had been outlawed.
Here he refers to Meir Kahane. Let's look at a quick video again about who Meir Kahane is.
Who was Rabbi Meir Kahane? In recent years, Israel has seemingly begun a swift descent into what many critics have described as fascism, with Benjamin Netanyahu's government being touted as the most right-wing government in Israeli history. The open hatred towards Palestinians seems to be growing, with it on full display at this year's flag march in Jerusalem, during which ultra-nationalist Israelis regularly chant death to Arabs. Whilst the extremity of this violence and hatred may seem novel to some, this kind of right-wing fervour has been gripping Israel since the 1970s, and Rabbi Meir Kahane played a pivotal role in it. Born in Brooklyn in 1932, Kahane first found fame when he created the Jewish Defense League in 1968, as a response to anti-Semitism that Jewish people were facing in the streets of New York. The JDL gained significant fame throughout America because of its militant activities and violent methods, but this fame brought with it attention from the FBI. Kahane was indicted for weapons smuggling and possession of explosives in 1971. This was not Kahane's first arrest or his last arrest, because after he received a suspended sentence, he decided to move to Israel, where he was arrested around 60 times more. Once in Israel, Kahane began to forge a political career and founded the Kach Party, which throughout the 1970s and early 1980s was largely unsuccessful. According to Israeli historian Tom Segal, Kahane was seen as nothing more than an eccentric troublemaker, destined to hold no more sway than lavatory graffiti. Segal's statement refers to the extremity of Kahane's views, which to many at the time within Israel were unpalatable. Kahane's disdain for the Palestinians went further than what was acceptable at the time. He referred to Arabs as cancer and called for their expulsion from Israel.
If we continue in this way, the Arabs, by their birth rate, not through any intifada, will be the majority here, and God help us then. They must go. That is the message. They must go.
In 1984, Kahane showed that he was no joke, when his Kach party received 25,000 votes in the Israeli parliamentary elections, enough for a seat in the Knesset. In the Knesset, Kahane pushed bills that proposed slavery and expulsion for non-Jewish people who would not accept Jewish supremacy, segregation of public spaces such as beaches, and the separation of marriages between Jews and non-Jews. Other members of the Knesset would frequently walk out when Kahane spoke, and one member compared Kahane's bills to the Nuremberg laws and found striking similarities. Kahane ultimately could not hide his extensive racism towards the Palestinians, and in July of 1985, the Knesset passed a law which banned candidates with racist acts or goals from standing in elections, spelling the end of Kahane's own political career. Kahane was banned from the 1988 elections, and in 1990, whilst in New York, he was assassinated. His Kach party was later banned in 1994 when Baruch Goldstein, a close friend and disciple of Kahane's, carried out a terrorist attack at the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron, known to Jews as the Cave of the Patriarchs. Goldstein's attack, which took place during Ramadan, killed 29 Palestinians.
What else can I say? Imagine if that's your hero as the minister of a modern country. What else can I say?
And another hero of Ben Gvir was Baruch Goldstein, who had committed a massacre of 28 Palestinian worshippers in the mosque in Hebron.
Here, Avi refers to Baruch Goldstein. He's the guy whose picture was hanging on Israel's national security minister's wall.
Gvir was so extreme that he invited reporters into his home, which is in an illegal Israeli settlement, you'll be shocked to hear, and showed them a picture of Baruch Goldstein, the man who massacred 29 Palestinians in a mosque in Hebron in 1994. He showed them a picture of him hanging on his living room wall.
Baruch Goldstein was an American-Israeli dual citizen, an ultra-nationalist terrorist who shot dead 29 Palestinian Muslims and wounded 125.
And those two are calling for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, not just from Gaza, but from the West Bank as well. So you have an Israeli government which is the most right-wing and racist government in Israel's history, the most pro-settler, and also the most Jewish supremacist government. So Zionism has evolved over the years, and it had a liberal phase, it had a socialist phase in the 1950s that I mentioned earlier, but today it has moved to the extreme right, and it's a really reactionary, discriminatory, racist, expansionist form of Zionism. This is what Israel is today, and that is why more and more young people in particular have turned against Israel. And as you said, in America, it's not just younger Jews, but the whole community has shifted its attitude towards Israel. So what we have is a disconnect in the West between the governments, the European governments, British government, American government, the governments that remain almost blindly and uncritically pro-Israeli, and the public, which is increasingly pro-Palestinians and increasingly critical of Israel. So we have this disconnect, and one reason that I have for optimism, a very limited reason, is that public opinion has shifted very dramatically in the last 3 months because of the Israeli actions in Gaza. And in the long term, Western foreign policy is bound to catch up with public opinion.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's a good way to end the video too. There's the only positive thing about this whole thing is that people are becoming aware of what's really happening in Palestine. The public opinion is definitely shifting in a big way, which is the only good thing, I guess, about this whole thing. Maybe eventually the Palestinians will be free. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you're a bit more aware of what's really going on in Palestine, what kind of government Israel has right now. I really hope Israel gets like a bit of a reasonable government, reasonable people in power. Israel deserves more than this, and the Palestinians definitely deserve a better life than right now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Not sure if you like the format, let me know. If you don't like it, also let me know. If it's very popular, I'll make more of these videos. If people actually enjoy them, I'll make them. Yeah, you can let me know if you enjoyed it by clicking the like button. Leave a comment. Let me know if you have any other topics for next time. And yeah, subscribe, leave a like, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.